Have you ever wondered what it was like to see the pyramids of Giza or the temples of Luxor before the age of mass tourism? Forget the tour buses and the crowds. Let's travel back in time to an era of adventure, discovery, and a completely different kind of Egyptian journey. Between 1860 and 1930, a new breed of traveler, the early tourist, began to explore the wonders of ancient Egypt. This wasn't just a vacation, it was an expedition. So, how did they even get there? For most, the journey began with a long sea voyage to Alexandria. From there, they'd take a train to Cairo, a modern marvel in its own right at the time. But the real adventure started on the Nile. The most iconic way to travel was by dahabia, a traditional Egyptian houseboat. Imagine gliding slowly down the river, sails billowing in the breeze, stopping at ancient sites that were often half buried in sand. These weren't quick day trips. A dahabia journey from Cairo to Aswan and back could take 2 to 3 months. It was a slow, immersive experience, allowing travelers to truly soak in the landscape and the rhythm of river life. For those on a tighter schedule or budget, there were steamships, pioneered by companies like Thomas Cook, which drastically cut down travel time and made the journey more accessible. Arriving in Cairo, tourists were thrust into a vibrant, bustling world. They'd stay in legendary hotels like Shepheard's, a hub of colonial society where explorers, aristocrats, and archaeologists all mingled. The first major destination, of course, was Giza. But getting there was an adventure in itself. Forget paved roads and air-conditioned coaches. Travelers would ride out on donkeys or in horse-drawn carriages, crossing dusty plains with the pyramids slowly growing on the horizon. Once there, the experience was raw and unfiltered. There were no barriers, no designated pathways. You could literally climb the Great Pyramid. Yes, you heard that right. Vintage photographs are filled with men in suits and women in long dresses perched hundreds of feet up the ancient stones. It was considered the ultimate tourist challenge, a rite of passage. They would hire local guides who, for a fee, would practically pull and push them up the steep, weathered blocks. It was exhausting, dangerous, and utterly exhilarating. After conquering the exterior, they would venture inside. Guided by the flickering light of candles or magnesium flares, they'd descend into the narrow, suffocating passages of the Great Pyramid, heading for the king's chamber. It was hot, dusty, and claustrophobic. The air was thick with the smell of bad guano and ancient stone. There were no electric lights, no handrails. It was a genuinely thrilling and slightly terrifying experience, a true descent into the heart of an ancient mystery. And let's not forget the Sphinx. Back then, it was still partially buried in sand, sometimes up to its neck, giving it an even more enigmatic and timeless quality. Tourists would pose for photos, have picnics at its base, and marvel at its silent, sand-swept majesty. Leaving Cairo behind, the journey south along the Nile unfolded like a storybook. Next stop, Luxor, the site of ancient Thebes. Here, they would explore the sprawling temple complexes of Karnak and Luxor. These sites were not the neatly excavated open-air museums we see today. Many areas were still buried, with colossal statues and columns poking out of the sand like ancient giants waking from a long sleep. Local villagers often lived right amongst the ruins, Jajic houses built against temple walls. Tourists would wander through a maze of stone, their imaginations firing as they tried to reconstruct the grandeur of the past. They'd hire local guides, often descendants of the very people who built these monuments, to lead them through the labyrinthine halls. Across the river lay the Valley of the Kings, the necropolis of the pharaohs. Visiting the tombs was a serious undertaking. It was a hot, dusty ride on donkey back into the desolate, sun-baked hills. One by one, they would descend into the earth, into the burial chambers of rulers like Ramesses the Great. The air was still and heavy. The light from their candles would dance across walls covered in vibrant, 3,000-year-old paintings. The colors were often shockingly bright, preserved in the darkness for millennia. It felt less like a tourist site and more like breaking into a sacred, silent world. Of course, the most famous discovery was yet to come. It was during this period, in 1922, that Howard Carter famously uncovered the tomb of Tutankhamun. The news electrified the world and triggered a wave of Egyptomania. Suddenly, Everyone wanted to see the treasures of the boy king, and tourism to the Valley of the Kings exploded. Further south, they reached Aswan and the stunning island temple of Philae. Before the construction of the Aswan High Dam, Philae was one of the most beautiful sights in all of Egypt, a jewel on the Nile. But even the earlier, Lower Aswan Dam, completed in 1902, caused the temple to be flooded for several months each year. This created a surreal and beautiful sight for early tourists who would row small boats through the temple's colonnades, with the tops of columns and pylons rising majestically from the water. It was a poignant, beautiful, and slightly melancholy experience, a glimpse of a wonder that was slowly being submerged. Finally, for the most intrepid travelers, there was Abu Simbel. Reaching these remote temples, carved into a mountainside, required a further multi-day journey by boat into Nubian territory. Those who made it were rewarded with an awe-inspiring sight: two massive temples guarded by colossal statues of Ramesses II, staring out over the Nile in a remote and silent wilderness. So, what did these early tourists leave behind? Souvenirs were a huge part of the experience. They weren't buying plastic pyramids. They were buying antiquities. The trade in artifacts, both real and fake, was rampant. You could buy anything from scarab amulets to mummy parts and even entire sarcophagi. This is, of course, ethically complicated and led to of Egypt's heritage being scattered in museums and private collections across the globe. But they also left behind an invaluable record. Through their diaries, letters, and especially their photographs, they captured a vision of Egypt that no longer exists. They documented monuments before modern restoration, ruins half swallowed by the desert, and a way of life along the Nile that was on the brink of change. These black and white images are more than just old pictures. They are time capsules. They show us the raw, untamed beauty of these ancient wonders and the spirit of the adventurous souls who first sought them out. Their journey was one of hardship, wonder, and a deep connection to the past. It laid the foundation for the tourism we know today, but it was an experience worlds apart. Thanks for joining me on this journey back in time. If you're fascinated by history and exploration, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories from the past. See you next time.